Quick note before you watch, I received early access from Paradox for this video, and therefore am in a way sponsored. This video is in no way a review of the contents of the DLC. I have another video which will review the DLC coming soon. If you're watching this the day it comes out, I'm going to be live on Twitch and YouTube a ton this week, so definitely come watch. Last note, if you saw the YouTube post where I polled what topic of video to do, you'll know that the poll ended up being perfectly 50-50 split, so I chose this video to release first. But the other one will also be coming tomorrow anyway. Okay, enjoy this Gigachad story. There is no greater despoiler in an era before Genghis Khan than Attila the Hun. Although the Mongols would later come to replace the Huns as the bringers of the end times and destroyers of all, the Huns in the classical era, with their misshapen skulls and relentless destruction, represented for some the darkest era of Europe, and for others, a lifestyle to emulate. This brings us to our protagonists, Khan Temir of the Pechenegs, who have dropped in the world in 1066, ruling the Pecheneg homelands of the old Magyars and Wallachia, which presumably were conquered sometime recently in the wake of the falling Bulgarian Empire. Temir is an ambitious Khan, who's got a little too high of an opinion of himself, but is really arrogant to be so egotistical when it's all true. Being a newcomer to the region, Temir is lucky in that he's got no real ties to the region, and where no pre-existing expectations exist, one can easily make up new ones as they see fit. Temir always saw himself in mythical characters of old, like Alexander the Great, Hannibal, Scipio, and, of course, Attila. His Hunnic heritage is confirmed by his steppe ancestry, as all steppe peoples are related by their way of life and veneration of their ancestors. Can Temir live up to the reputation of Attila, and if possible, even surpass it? Let's find out. Up in the great blue sky, it's no question that Attila himself would love to observe the battles and campaigns of those who claim his heritage, and his eyes would be moved to the Pechenegs when Temir began pillaging Hungary in the name of Attila. He declared to his men in every battle that at this point he was worthy of Attila's heritage and that he would earn it by force, as so often was the way of the steppe peoples. He initiated his campaign from Romania, where he exploited his subjugated vassals there to get the food he'd need for a long campaign like this, and then moved west into southern Hungary. He began burning Krasos, and the Hungarian king responded quickly, engaging the army. Of course, the Hungarians had long since abandoned their steppe traditions, and so they could not stand a fight against an army of mobile horse archers. The Hungarians collapsed relatively easily, and the army moved further into Hungary's lush farmlands. The ways of settled people made them weak and easy targets for real men like Temir's. The army marched to the Hungarian capital in Heves and burned it down, taking David, the brother of King Solomon, with them. In a desperate bid to at least try and keep their land safe, the Hungarians raised the tattered remains of their army and went to defend the capital. They were of course handily defeated. Afterwards, Temir celebrated his first son's birth, Bula. It was important that he be born on the battlefield like this so that all could know that Bula was quite literally born for battle. Upon his triumphant return to Wallachia, Temir distributed the raid loot to his soldiers and held a feast where he would regale his court with stories of the war. Now, of course, it was only natural that there'd be some exaggeration at the feast, and of course Temir did mention a some 10,000 man strong Hungarian army, which in reality was about a quarter the size. The stories brought him more soldiers, who quickly expressed their wish to fight for glory. Of course, raiding and traveling to other places can bring more than just gold, as in the east of the Pecheneg kingdom, news of a curse sent by Tengri reached the court. Korkutan's flux, which may have begun somewhere in the borderlands between Cumania and Temir's realm, was working its way east and west along the trade routes in the area. This bloody flux was a pretty serious disease, although not something that was expected to really destroy a whole kingdom or anything. Temir, of course, chose to practically ignore the disease, as he believed that the weak got to die anyway if they couldn't stand up to a little bloody excrement. That was his opinion, of course, until his wife caught the disease, followed by himself, which prompted him to find a medicine man that could solve it. His physician, Yevdi, was able to treat both him and his wife with some success, and once Kortan caught the disease, Temir's massive ego was, at least to some extent, tamed. Despite the treatments, Temir's wife, Usunbike, did pass away after she unwisely suggested that she was feeling better and was ready to have another child. She was not feeling better, and the combination of her pregnancy beginning and the flux took her life. There was no time for grief though, as instead of hosting a funeral, Temir got himself a new wife immediately. He needed more sons and daughters, so he married Teodora, a local Christian Romanian that was particularly skilled in strategy. Temir liked to have a wife who was martially capable, hoping she would pass it on to their kids. After his recovery from the flux that took his wife, Temir moved south into the Roman Empire to raid them while they were busy fighting the Turks in Armenia. During the campaign, his son also recovered from the flux, showing his strength from a young age. By December, the flux was over, and Temir did pay out some of his loot to help the locals recover from the devastation it caused. This was ultimately a relatively minor outbreak, but one which, to some individuals, will always be apocalyptic in scale on account of their lost loved ones. Either way, Timir's ambitions go beyond the lives of those around him, so he began emulating Attila's own harrying of the Roman Empire, as he burned through Bulgaria, leading into Thrace. He probably can't quite take down Constantinople yet, but he can certainly leave the city, a sole bastion in a sea of flames. Timir's raid stopped with Adrianopolis, after which he returned again to Wallachia. He spent the money he got on equipment to go hunting in the forests of Romania. He would hunt a wolf to show his power over the fearsome creature. He was unfortunately unable to catch the beast though, but he showed valiance in even trying. Seeking to outdo Attila, Temir conducted a raid on the other Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire. During his campaign though, another outbreak of disease began, presumably spread by his raids in Thrace. Luckily for him, he's off in Austria right now, and therefore is unconcerned with the disease, only hoping it won't get to his children. Searching for a great battle to inspire his men, Temir actively sought out any army in this Western Roman Empire, including the vassals of it who were fighting their own internal struggles. The emperor himself seemed uninterested in putting up an army, perhaps concerned that he would only be feeding Timir's legend if he fought, but the vassals were a little duller about that. In Bavaria, Temir would decimate various armies, putting to the sword all who he came across, and after a total slaughter in Regensburg, he went northwest to the capital of Klingenberg, which he burned down to ensure that the emperor knew he would be punished for ignoring the Khan's armies. Having raided now both Roman empires, Temir was ready to begin work on the writing of a chronicle that would emphasize his actions as walking in the footsteps of those of Attila. In order to increase the legitimacy of his claim, he'd have to get the story spreading around the steppes, and if possible, even the fearful settled folks in Hungary and Constantinople. Seeing his rampant destruction though, the traitorous Wallachians tried to organize an uprising, which they would quickly regret after Temir decided it could be a precious piece of his chronicle that he would savagely brutalize those that rose against him. At first, the Wallachians caught him by surprise, and so he had to retreat for the first time in his military career, but after reorganizing in the east, he fought the Romanians once more in Tigetsi, where they were absolutely destroyed. The shattered rebels were followed and killed to a man in Moldova, after which the castles which they thought would keep them safe were sieged and their occupants enslaved or killed. Of course, this was twisted into their chronicle as a different kind of story. Temir's chroniclers emphasized that the only reason the Romanians suffered such a fate was that they were rebellious. The writers looked to the handful of Romanians that didn't rebel, and their castles and people remained untouched. In this way, the Hunnic heritage legend became one of tolerance and trust. Those who could be trusted would be tolerated. In July of 1075, the war was over, with all the rebelling Romanians arrested. Before dealing with them, Temir had to deal with opportunistic Serbs from Rushka that were trying to invade Romania. Looking to find powerful warriors and to fulfill the sense of tolerance and trust that he was espousing in his chronicle, he recruited several captured warriors from the ranks of the Romanian rebels, and indeed some of them were quite formidable. Those who would renounce allegiance to God and assert their loyalty to the Khan were allowed to fight in his ranks, and so a squad of new Romanian bogaturs joined the army. One bogatur, Otrok, earned an acclaimed status as the leader of the horse archers in the army and as an expert in hunting both men and beasts. The Serbs were defeated shortly after, and of course, all these recent battles would become the talk of a legendary feast that Temir would host. This time the focus was particularly on sharing stories that his writers were making, which were of course completely factual and not simply based on events. The feast was a great success, with some lords adopting the legend and spreading it all of their own across their own realms. In celebration, Temir decided it was time to burn down more of the Roman Empire, but this time he'd get more ambitious. It wasn't about money or prestige now, it was about going beyond Attila himself. The former Hunnic king had never taken Constantinople, but Temir certainly would. He sent his entire army south to Thrace, where he burned down a few holdings to alert the Romans of his arrival, and then began the great siege of the Theodosian walls. During the siege, his sleep was disturbed by visions of death, which would find their way into the chronicle. These visions were not of his own death though, but rather a blessing from death, who will guide him along his path to immortality, at least in terms of his legacy. In August, Constantinople burned, and the city was sacked like had never happened before. In the flames of the city, he saw visions of Attila himself, who spoke to him of true immortality. Attila, in many ways, achieved immortality insofar as he is still alive in the minds and hearts of others. Temir will have to earn the same thing if he wants to be as much of a legend as the Great Hun. He headed home, having turned 45 on the campaign and with a new focus on his children. Previously, he had left them to be taken care of by his wife, but now he understood the importance of legacy. He would need children that could continue his heritage after he did one day pass away, as all men do. Unfortunately, his legend wasn't spreading very far because he didn't have the support of most of the lords around him. Claiming to be a descendant of the Huns was a common enough cause in the western steppes, but it was with the burning of Constantinople that the powerful Khan of the Cumans, Saru the Kind, would bend the knee to Temir's stories. The Kind Khan was easily swayed by threats of physical violence, and so Cumanian writers began sharing stories of Temir's heritage throughout Khazaria. While conducting what at this point were routine raids into Hungary and Austria, Temir was finally met with combat against the Western Roman Emperor, who was in conflict with Hungary at the time. A three-way free-for-all ensued, with the ultimate winner being Temir. He defeated the Hungarians in Austria and the Romans in Hungary, which was quite impressive given the Romans had double the soldiers. Of course, one Turkic nomad was worth 20 German peasants, but numbers all the same sold a satisfying story. He returned home to host a tournament for his bogaturs, and as usual, to spread more word of his legendary deeds out west. He hosted an archery competition to see who the best archer in the land would be, since nomadic warfare was so often dependent on the bow. Of course, it would be Temir himself who won, fair and square, and with his victory he was able to justify even more that he was able to defeat such great armies in the west. His legend was spreading east, now into Khazaria, thanks to Khan Saru. Looking for more influence, Temir made a bold offer to the Byzantine Emperor in the form of a personal visit, which, thanks to the carts laden with gold and silver, appeared to be a show of tribute. Was Temir signaling an end to hostilities between him and the Romans? The Basilius, Manuel, sure was hoping so. Temir entered Constantinople's throne room, and I was impressed with how quickly they'd fixed it up after he looted it just a few years ago. He stood in front of Manuel, taking neither knee nor a bow, and spoke, his tribute sitting behind him. Manuel of the Romans. Such a shame we did not meet last time I was here. It's quite rude to not attend to your guests, you know. I'm willing to forgive your breaking of the hospitable ways of lords of our stature, and in fact, I even present you with a gift. This is a coin with your face on it. An uncanny resemblance, I must say. I took some 200 of these from your coffers alongside invaluable jewelry, silver, gold, and any other mortal material one might think of. You may notice such material here in my cart. I'd like you to know that I personally accounted for each piece of treasure here, and I will now order my men to place every single piece back, exactly where they took it. Temir's men grabbed all the treasure and meticulously put back every piece in what could only be presumed to be the spot that it was taken from when his armies burned down the city and keep here. The Basilius guards stepped forward, but the moment they did, the Basilius motioned for him to stand down. He seemed to be playing along. I remember this place well. Quite frankly, it disgusts me. When my late kinsman Attila spent so much of his life trying to enter this place, I'd have thought it would be more than just gilding and decadence. Everything you have here, I also have in my yurt. I have jewels, and gold, and silver. I have swords, lances, arrows, and armor too. There is one subtle difference, though, between what you have and what I have. Mine are tools, while yours are ornaments. The jewels you love, those are gifts for my illustrious visitors. The gold you covet, that is what funds the grains for my horses. The swords, they slay my foes, and my arrows slay the ones I'm too lazy to approach. What do your swords and arrows do, Manuel? I'll leave you with this. Know that I am returning your goods simply because I do not need them. I have them already, but tenfold. In return, you can let the world know that Attila was wasting his time with this wretched city, and that ultimately, there's further greatness in the hardship of the steppe than there is in the decadence of this dusty room. He turned around, without so much as an address from the Basilius, who was just hoping this would be over soon. To say the message was received would be an understatement. The message was burned into the Roman Emperor's brain, a brand, as he, reluctantly, accepted that Temir was indeed the descendant of Attila the Hun. No man without such an ancestry could possibly be so bold. This event would definitely spread the story far and wide, as the massive populations of the Eastern Roman Empire would spread the fear of Attila's avatar and his total dominance over the prevailing military powers of Europe. The legend even began spreading into Kiev, and in November of 1082, it became an illustrious story spread throughout Khazaria, Ruthenia, and the Byzantine Empire. Further raids spread the story more, as even people as far east as the Aral Sea were beginning to tell the tale of Temir's legendary visit to Constantinople. Temir tried to convince the Western Roman Emperor to adopt the story too, but he wasn't able to make such an astounding visit as he did with the Eastern Roman Emperor, and so Henrik IV refused. The thing about stories and plagues, which is shared, is their exponential growth. Already, the true events of Temir's deeds were impressive, but to say that the Turks of the Aral Sea and the Greeks of Macedonia had wildly different accounts would be an understatement. To Christians, Temir was the devil himself, putting to sword even the great Romans, but in the East he was praised as an avatar of the great blue sky, bringing his way of life to the people that needed it most. The soft, decadent, and settled peoples of Europe needed to be reminded that ultimately their material possessions meant nothing if they could not live a virtuous life in the eyes of the heavens. By August of 1088, the legend had spread so far as to become mythical, which it really was by now. Temir was confirmed to be Attila's descendant by a genealogy connecting him to a previously unknown bastard of the famed Hun, and although a bastardly connection, blood cares not for marriage vows. The legend was completed and published as a chronicle written in Greek and Temir's native Turkish, so as to spread far and wide throughout both East and West. Although a story written in words is immortal so long as its records remain legible, words could be erased, and people's memories could waver. There was only one way to truly ensure that the legendary story of Temir's raids and bold exploits would remain, and that was through brick and stone, and perhaps even marble. Using his memories of the Palace of Constantinople, he would commission an architect to draw up plans of a nearly identical palace to the one he burned down before, and have it built in his capital of Karakarman. Was it maybe hypocritical that he had criticized the basileus for his pointless buildings? Absolutely. But hypocrisy is often the realm of a king, and one man's decadence and decay are another's achievement and accolade. Of course, he'd need the money to buy all the materials that his architects would need to build it, but luckily, there's lots of gold and silver still left unpillaged out there. As a special bonus for his palace, he went and burned down Constantinople again, taking some of its materials for his own palace. At the same time, he also began another story about himself, as he was simply not done creating his legacy yet. He began the chronicle of his life of service to the eternal blue sky, based on his brush with death in Constantinople all that time ago. In addition to those pieces from Constantinople, he would travel further west to the edges of Attila's former empire and bring pieces from its most glorious cities to his palace. He particularly targeted Paris, which had grown to be a beautiful city along the river, which had only been sacked some few hundred years ago by Vikings. Along the way, the very same Saru of Cumania would once again be pressured into spreading the story of Temir's sainthood, and with his support, the entire steppe might begin to praise him as an agent of the sky. Paris and its surroundings were burnt to the ground, and from each city and castle some stones were lifted to be returned home for the architects to refashion into a beautiful palace in the steppes. The nice thing about such a land is that it's quite flat, so building the palace shouldn't even be that difficult. The stones were dragged all the way back to Karakarman, but more materials and money were needed. Turns out the riches of Europe weren't quite enough in reality. This time he would raid Macedonia, the old seat of Alexander the Great, and use stones blessed by his heritage to add yet more flair to his palace. It was with those extra bricks that his architects began work on the palace, which they said would be a several years long project. It would certainly be worth it for such a beautiful building. From here, Temir's days began to dull, as he had more or less accomplished all he needed to. What remained was simply to wait until the story of his great sainthood was spread throughout enough land that he could claim it to be indisputably true. He raided more, bringing more souls to the great blue sky, and he cared for his children, who were blessed to have such a father. By October of 1094, the story was spread throughout much of the steppes, and its glory equally so. In July of 1094, he successfully convinced the Kaiser Heinrich V to spread the story around, on account of their friendship which formed on the battlefield. To some lords, an enemy of the realm can be a personal friend sometimes, given that ultimately, the two warriors had respect for each other. Temir had always defeated his enemies, but the Kaiser did put up a valiant fight, and in doing so, contributed to his legendary stories. Meanwhile, Heinrich was known as the only one to really fight back against the Pecheneg hordes, who raided with impunity across much of the land. In November, just a few years later, Temir was finally reaching the advanced age that takes all lives. He was infirm, and although kept healthy by his constant warfare and combat, he was certainly beginning his twilight years at this point. He still had time to get his saintly legend out there though, and so clung to life furiously. Unfortunately, his health went into decline when he caught a form of measles known as the Khan's Evil. Quite fitting, I must say, but his physician was able to treat the measles by simply scraping off every pustule from his body, including the ones on his face. He was left with a horrifically disfigured face, but alive at least. The Khan's Evil spread throughout the Danube River cities and even to Constantinople. Of course, this was a bad sign for Temir's claim to sainthood, but he was able to spin it around into being the natural cycle of life and death that the great blue sky orchestrates for all. So long as he would survive, he'd know that his place was not yet with the heavens. In the east, the old Khan Saru, who had been something of a personal friend and ally of Temir all his life, passed away, and fractured his realm between his sons. That would complicate the spreading of the legend, since now each son would have to be convinced, but instead of doing that, Temir decided he'd use his birthright as Attila's descendant to conquer Khazaria for himself. He declared war on Saru's children, who were fractured, and easily conquered his way east to the Don and Azov rivers. After usurping the title of Khan of Zaporizhia, he would turn his titular kingdom of the Pechenegs into one of actual legal status, using his power to consolidate kingdoms, which he earned after the Attila legend was completed. Just an out-of-character side note, I think it's really nice to be able to make titular titles de jure now, even if it doesn't actually mean much mechanically. Also, interesting note, because the Pecheneg title has no de jure empire over it, there's just a blank spot in the de jure empire map mode now. Pretty cool. The most pious life of Khan Temir was spreading further east thanks to his conquests, and it was also spreading west and north thanks to the friendships with the Ruthenians and Western Romans, but ultimately, Temir is almost 80 now. He'll have to spread a little bit faster if he wants to complete it before his death. He invaded the Caucasus to complete his conquest of Khazaria and crowned himself emperor of Attila's old realm. He was now Khagan of the Hunnic Empire, which, although smaller than the one of old, was equally feared for its raids and destruction throughout Europe. These conquests spread his saintly story further, and in May of 1116 he completed the mythical story of his life as a bringer of souls to the Great Blue Sky. He began a great evangelization of the realm in Tengri's name, showing his great miracles and abilities off to any who would watch. Many of the Wallachians of his realm converted quickly, with some being convinced by the miracles and others fearing what would come if they did not convert. He also organized the construction of a great shrine, although he was less excited about this building than his great palace in Karakerman. In similar fashion to his friend in Klingenberg, the Kaiser Heinrich, he also added the epithet of Holy to his empire's name, showing its place as the premier Tengri realm of the steppes. This new Holy Hunnic Empire stood as a third great realm to rival the Holy Roman and Byzantine empires, who, while unconquered, were at least to some extent cowed before Temir. Looking to secure the holy site of Kerch in Crimea, Temir declared a war for his ancestral claims in Khazaria and would also promise that Constantinople would be his this day. The Ancestral Claims War he may declare because he is a descendant of Attila, of course, and though the war allows him to claim the region of Khazaria, this is a winner-takes-all format, and he intended to take the most prized possession he could from the decadent Eastern Romans. The great city of Constantinople has been a jewel in the eyes of many throughout history, and although for Temir it was just another palace to attain loot from, it was still a worthy symbol to add to his Hunnic Empire. He began a story detailing the exploits of his many trips to the city, and the great battles he had with the Greek cataphracts of the region. He entered Kerch, occupying it quickly, while spreading word of his great battles with the Romans, both Holy and Eastern. After Kerch was occupied, he took boats through the Black Sea to Constantinople, this time not to sack it, but occupy it and claim it. Rather than come to defend the city, the Basilius sent troops to Kerch to relieve the cities there, perhaps understanding that there was no way he could defeat Temir's army. In early October of 1118, Constantinople fell and the city was looted, but more importantly, Temir sat on its opulent throne, planted his dynasty's flag there, and left it in place, knowing none would disturb it. He was old and weak by now, but still had the strength to put a flag down. His men helped him onto another boat, with pride, as they sailed back to Kerch to confront the Roman army. With the army destroyed, the capital sacked, and the holy city of Kerch in his hands, Temir ended the war, taking the greatest city of the East for himself. Constantinople, the last holdout of Attila's empire, was now in Temir's empire. He immediately moved his capital there. The Battle of Byzantion spread around, but ultimately, Temir's 87 years of age and general infirm stature made the legend spread more slowly. He was tired after nearly 50 years of unfettered ambition, and this one just didn't have the same status as his other ones. In December of 1120, the legend became illustrious, but that's about as far as it would go. He completed his legend preemptively in April of 1122. He was able to launch a legendary adventure, which is like a reigned adventure but for a whole kingdom, not just one duchy. But my god, let the man have some peace. He died at 90 years of age in 1123, and he went down as a true legend in the history of the steppes. To say Temir left not just shoes to fill for his chosen heir, Temir II, would be inaccurate. He left an entire world of expectations to fill. How can a person follow up the life of a literal saint except by becoming one themselves? Perhaps by just continuing their legend forever. Ultimately, Temir got his wish of immortality. His legends would live forever, as each successive Holy Hunnic heir would continue his legends and venerations till time immemorial. Temir II simply can't live up to the life of his father. He's already a drunk, gout-ridden man in his 50s, so all I can do is promote his father, in the hopes that some of that glory might trickle down to him. Before we finish off the video, here are some other legends that were around in the world this run. We've got some holy site custodians, some great dynasty deeds, and most interestingly, a Crusader Queen of Jerusalem. I bet her story is quite something, but it's not too relevant to the steppes. This has been the story of the great warrior saint of the Great Blue Sky, Temir. For those watching this before release, I'll let you know that this story is for entertainment and isn't a review yet. I have lots of thoughts on my early access experiences, which I'll be streaming on Twitch and on YouTube, links below, but I have another video, which is a proper overview and review of this DLC's mechanics that'll come out before March 6th, so you can get an idea of if this DLC is for you or not. I'll just say here that my thoughts are complex about this DLC, and I need a whole proper video to really show that fully. Check out my stream if you want to ask me questions live, or just join my Discord and ping me anytime with questions there. I'll answer what I can. Thank you for your time.